have any questions? Welcome back to Lincoln Square. It's the strategy session. Tonight I am joined by Joe Trippy.
Hey, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Here I am, your beat up uh, Sensei Al Bob. Here it is, Thursday and Tuesday. I had my heart surgery, and yesterday I left the hospital. I'm still wearing scrubs because my friend who dropped me off, he forgot to pick me up. And not only that, he took all my clothes, my phone, my everything. So when I was in the hospital, I was totally naked, and so they put me in a very nice room in what they call the hospitality center. It was just kind of like the Holiday Inn. They fed me and treated me very nice. And when they realized who I was and that I could give them readings, um, they basically started coming into that nice room. And everyone, lots of nurses, lots of doctors, lots of techs, and the administrators, they all kind of showed up for like about 3 hours. They came and I gave them readings, and that was kind of interesting. And then they very nice. They actually signed me up into their organization to have health care. So, um, and a gold star next to my name, and now, and so they took me. All the doctors gave me prescriptions for all the drugs I could ever want, and they packed me up and gave me about a month or two worth of everything. And they said that I now, have a refill prescription. I don't have to come back and get, prescribed by the moron singular doctor. And they gave me 3 different doctors to be my general um, doctor, so general practitioner. So I could be in 3 different places and I could always be taken care of. So that was very nice. And the fact that my friend left me there without picking me up, because he thought it was the next day, not yesterday, but he was going to get me today. But and he took all my clothes and my phone, so I couldn't call him up. And so it was quite interesting. So they gave me these scrubs, right? And now they said I could be the double doctor. So I'm going to wear these scrubs all the time. And so that's just a little. So right now I felt no pain yesterday, and just after the operation. Well, I have no idea how much after the operation. I was in the recovery ward, and I was talking to all the different people in there, and we were talking about every kind of philosophic. And I was amazing that the people who were getting heart surgery at the same time, there were 6 of us, that we were all. There were a number of deacons, a number of philosophers, really interesting conversations that we were talking. And so we were talking about all our experiences because all these people had the same experience I had of dying. Let's see, what are you guys saying? Let's see. I think I put the glasses right over here. Yeah, I did. Oh, ooh. But now I'm no longer feeling like, oh boy, I feel great. It's like every muscle in my body hurts. I got big black and blue things up near my groin. That's where they went in. Let's see. Bet you got some cool pink. No, I didn't go for any of that. I mean, they gave it to me like without me asking it. Whatever they used to put me down when I was brought into that room and kind of came awake. I was like, whoa. I was feeling no pain then, and Yesterday, the only time I felt pain was they put me in this. I was in a hospital bed, and they put me in an alcove, right? And as they moved us out of the recovery ward, and they put us like in the hallway, and that's the new thing is the hallway. And then when my friend didn't pick me up, they put me in the Holiday Inn, which was really nice. They have like it's called the Hospitality Center, and it was very very nice. And they put me up there. But that night after yesterday, let's see, between Tuesday and yesterday, it was kind of painful to be because I had all these machines I was hooked up to, and they had this thing on my blood pressure cuff on my arm, and it automatically took my blood pressure every 15 minutes. So it like squeezed my arm and beeped, beep, beep, and then this other thing, my oxygen, and that beeped, and they had all these pads all over me. And if I moved around and it didn't, the contact wasn't right, it like had alarms. And so, I beeped, but not, it was not comfortable. And the bottom part was made out of metal, so it was cold. And I was basically I had one of those gowns on, so my butt was hanging out, and I couldn't piss, so that was kind of uncomfortable. But my friend didn't find me, and so they put me up in the Holiday Inn, and that was fun. And like I said, because everybody, all the different doctors who did the operation and the nurses who constantly kept in before while they were preparing me, I said, "Oh, let me look at your palm." And they were like, "Whoa!" They all said, "That's pretty amazing. How do you do that?" And I said, "Experience. Practice makes perfect, and all the above." So here we are, 7 minutes and 7 seconds, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with your sensei about me, in my scrubs as the double doctor, and I am right now. It's like someone beat me up with a baseball bat, right? And so but I knew that this would be the case. I mean, I've worked with people who had operations and et cetera, et cetera. So I know that I've kept my arm's length away from anyone doing something like this to me. But I have to tell you, it was getting to a point that if I got up and walked across the room, I was like, ah, ah, and now not so much, right? So, and they said, they said it's going to take you about 5 to 10 days to like get really. You don't lift anything heavy. Don't do this. Don't do that. So I'm staying with a friend because they have a shower because I'm supposed. They gave me this stuff to wash my body with 3 times a day, so I don't get infections on my body. Anyway, uh, so anyway, it's kind of, and I'm very good with pain because I've had after I died in 2014, I was like 460 pounds overweight, and every joint was like roasted. Um, so I've felt pain. I have neuropathy, I have charcoal legs. I got a lot of things wrong with me. But now I got a whole new bunch of doctors who are going to take care of me. So, and I don't have to worry. I mean, they said, we've signed you up with the best insurance. You don't have to pay anything. You're plugged into, you know, as long as Social Security and Medicare still exist, I'll be, because I'm also hooked up to two other things they put me on insurance wise. So there aren't any co-payments or anything. So that's I got rich people. That's what the doctor said. You got rich people medicine now. So, uh, and so that's how my life is. I kind of always find myself, and it can be really, oh, isn't that too bad? That must have been really terrible. Oh, that's good, But no, like a good example, and the story I was going to tell you about, in Genesis, right? The first line in Genesis, other than and in the beginning, when it goes, they were made in the image and likeness, and Elohim, right? El is the Hebrew for God, right? The main creator. number one, right? And it's interesting. In the Ten Commandments, the first law is have no false gods, meaning there are plenty of other demigods out there that have been part of humanity, and they talk about the Nephilim, and there's a guy named Jordan Maxwell. He's a guy like me, average guy, a little chunky, and he always seems to find himself in the right place, the right time, and meet the right people. I mean, he knows everyone, right? So I've known him a long time because when the U.S. Psychotronic Society in the '70s, when we started it, we'd had these lectures, right? Because we were part of more extended kind of thing. Be gentle with your going for a while. Yes, exactly. Yes, at least 10 days I'm going to be um, taking things slow. And the next operation I'm going to, and they kind of signed me up for it, is get my hip replaced and maybe my knees replaced. And this one doctor says, "Hey, have you ever heard about stem cells?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." And he goes, "What do you think?" I said, "Yeah, but it's awful expensive." He goes, "Oh no, I can sign you up." And so I got some patches on me. We'll see how good that does with my joints. He said, "You can fix your joints." I said, "All my joints are bone to bone." "Really? You gonna fix that?" And he said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Okay." I said, "As long as you're gonna pay for it." So so that was a great experience. I mean, I had a great time. I probably gave at least 50 readings, and virtually everyone. I mean, some of those people were crying. Just like. So my friend on the second day didn't pick me up. They basically got me an Uber to drive me home. So I didn't even have shoes, and they didn't have shoes. So they gave me these hospital socks that people patty around in, and they gave me 3 or 4 pairs to almost make a pair of shoes. But I have charcoal legs and charcoal ankles and charcoal knees and charcoal feet. So if I don't really have a good pair of shoes, I really can't even walk. And so again, a guy with a stem cell thing, so I think this might help that. So he gave me a bunch of those patches to stick all over me for the next. He said, when you run out of these in about a month, I'll give you more. Right. So anyway, so he did. He had his ulterior motive. I'm his lab rat. Right. We'll see how it works. So my sister, she's a pyramid sales scam person who sells all kinds of like stuff like this. And so she's been talking about stem cells for years. Now back in the day when I worked for the VA, and I started to hear about stem cells because stem cells have been around for years. And when I was at the U.S. Psychotronic Society, and that was part of my thing, was at the VA, I experienced, the hospital, the medical model. My boss sent me to all these different healers to learn. He says, "I want you." He one day, I was just a bedpan guy, and I had been there about 3 months, and I lived not too far from. I lived in Brooklyn, and a friend of mine who I lent $500 to, he skipped town, and he said, "Can't pay." I bumped into him just before he skipped town, and I said, "Listen, you owe me $500." And he said, "Oh, well, I can't pay you, but I have a Harley Davidson motorcycle. It's worth way more than $500." And he said, "Here's the title," and signed it over. So now we're even, Steven. Okay. So I was driving around on a motorcycle for those, first 6 months until I went to a gas station, and this guy, because I'm not a big fan of driving, or especially in New York, it brings out the worst in me. And I've been able to smooth out all my raw bumps of growing up in urban big cities and dealing with hard ass people. Um, but the only thing I was not, and I did a little better, is my New York City driving personality. Right, speeding, cutting people off, all that kind of stuff. I don't do that anymore. So I said, once I took the training on being an EMT fireman, and I took a course in how to drive the fire truck, right? And they said never speed because if you speed, you probably have an accident and wreck the $500,000 fire truck and probably hurt yourself and everybody in it. Um, but if you just do the speed limit, you will get to where you're going only about 3 minutes slower than if you sped. So those cops who are zipping along and ambulances who zip along, they don't have to. Really, they don't, because they're within a certain parameter of distance. And they don't have to speed. But anyway, so I had this motorcycle, and I went to a gas station, and this guy goes, "Oh wow, that's a Harley." I said, "Yeah, yeah, it's Harley." He goes, and so he knew everything about it. What year it was, what it was, and it was had a certain type of cylinder and all this, special stuff. He goes, "You ever think of selling it?" I said, "Yeah. What do you want? Well, what would you pay me?" He said, $3,500. This is like 1972. That's like $15,000 today. And I said, I actually have the title right here. So I said, can you give me that right now? And he's, yeah. So he goes over to a bank, right? And he gets out $3,500. And he goes, I just called the tow truck. They're going to come and, like one of those things that, not a tow truck like towing it, but put it on a flatbed kind of thing. So anyway, he took it away, and bango, there I was, $3,500 richer. So, and I could just take the bus, from right in front of. I live near the clock tower. I live almost right on the East River, and right where the Manhattan Bridge and the um, Brooklyn Bridge. Brooklyn Bridge goes down to City Hall, and the Manhattan Bridge goes to Canal Street. Right? So anyway, right between it, there are a whole bunch of, I don't know, 15, 20, eh, 10-story concrete buildings, red brick covered, that were, they were built like in, starting in the 1890s up through the 1920s. And that was there were many different manufacturing zones, and that was one of them. And this one was just down the road from the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and these factories made all the widgets that went together to make the boats. Right? So anyway, they were big, gigantic lofts. They were about 5 to 10,000 square feet of floor, had windows all the way around, high ceilings, concrete. It's really great. I lived in one of those for almost nothing. Again, I worked for. Or I was more a consultant for a real estate company, and I would, yes, I was working in the hospital. That was my main job, but I still do. I always still do electric work, right? Because I enjoy doing it, and always usually works out good for me. Anyway, so that's where I lived, and there was a road that went just along all of the industrial areas along the East River down to where the Brooklyn Navy Yard is. And I basically would just take the M33, and it only cost a dime in those days. And there I went. And then they gave me a Metro card, which was nice. It had nothing. You just kind of showed it. You didn't really swipe it or anything. And you could get on a bus, and you could get on the subway, and I got that for working at the VA. And so So I was being an artist. I was being a cultural provocateur. I was being an art party ringleader, and I was being an electrician. And I was studying all kinds of medicine, right? All types of alternative medicine. But when I first started working there, I was just a bedpan guy, and I mostly, they would bring people in, and mostly everybody who came in was strung out on, was like blown up and strung out on heroin. And why all those, heroin addicts came back from Vietnam? It wasn't like they were doing drugs. I mean, a lot of them were, but the military, when they would put them on C-130 to fly them out of Vietnam, and if they were going East Coast, they go to Germany, and they would go into those medical hospitals there and get, you know, they would get them up to a certain level of being fixed. You know, there at the mashes, their life, they'd be operated on and have emergency surgery, and their lives would be saved, and their health would be stabilized, and then they'd fly them out to either Germany or the Philippines. And if people lived on the West Coast, they go to the Philippines, and they go into those, and that's why there's so many nurses and doctors that are Filipino in America, because the Philippines were almost just like Hawaii. That was one of we got that through the Spanish American War. Right? So then we went in there, and the Filipinos expected, oh, good, the Americans are going to, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, we'll be able to have some freedom here. And no, we didn't give that to them. We basically just treated them like slaves. And so they rebelled. And we had a big time war in the Philippines where we literally killed a million Filipinos while we were trying to rejigger them, right? And that war, all these wars that we're having now and that we've had ever since, are really extensions of the Nephilim, who, those guys showed up, and they were, again, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, and in the beginning, we we will be making them in our image. It doesn't say my image; it says our image. So we were somebody's lab experiment, meaning there were all these good-looking, you know, indigenous hominins running around. And the really cute girls, the Nephilim said, "Oh, I want to have sex with that one." And they would get them pregnant. And that's where we came from. We were manufactured from. So forget about it. That's why, evolution doesn't quite work, right? Because humanity just kind of appeared, right? And then there are at least five different points where we get a upgrade. And right now we're going through an experience of having that upgrade, the big splat, right? We're being rebranded. And because what's happening is genetically, um, that, so in the Bible, Abraham and all the boys talk about how humans have this complicated thing that in us there is the God spirit, and in the other part of us is the slimy, um, you know, hominin. Because just like every other animal on Earth, humanity back in the day, we had the same kind of thing. We did not have higher thoughts. We responded by our just, oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I want to have sex. Oh, I feel threatened. I'll kill that guy. Meaning, really never gave a thought about anything. We just responded. From our hormones, from our who we were, what like a cat or a dog or a lizard or whatever, right? And they don't really think about it. They don't have philosophy. Now I've had a dog, I've had a cat, I've dealings with lots of animals. They have intelligence. I would say they even have a consciousness of a cat consciousness, a dog consciousness, but they don't drive cars or build airplanes or any of that sort of thing. And so that's us, and that is that part of us that is and like where did the Nephilim come from? They were aliens. They were extraterrestrial. They weren't from here. And we have Earth has been a place that they've had visitors, forever. Whatever you know texts are around, there is a statement of the extraterrestrial. And they don't call it that. They'll call them the Watchers, or they'll call them the Nephilim, or whatever, right? And space is a big neck of the woods. So not all of them look like us. Some of them do, and especially the ones who had sex with the indigenous creatures that were hominins, and where we came from. But there are other ones who have come here and realized that we're so gullible. You just give any of these guys a line about a religion, about a god. Oh, they'll follow it. They'll have wars. They'll make money. They'll take. I mean, so there is, the right of kings. The almost, not almost, but a religious. You know what the word "fuck" stands for? Fornicate under church and king. Do you know what the word fornicate means? Doesn't mean just to have intercourse. Fornicate is to disconnect from the higher sense of God's love for us, the covenant that the New Testament is constantly talking about, and the Old Testament too. After the Jews weren't the Jews; they were the Hebrew tribes in the Old Testament, and it isn't until Moses and get escaping from Egypt that the Jews become the Jews, right? And they're not really that. God doesn't call them the Jews. God calls them Israel, right? And basically, Israel is a human form that has a higher sensibility towards the connection that we have with the great Maker Spirit, right? And even though we're just, the outcome of the Nephilim having a good old time with the swamp rats of our species, and that's kind of what we are. We we're a culture. They talk about all the different cultures. What's a culture? But something in a petri dish. That's what we are. We're somebody's lab experiments, and that's why we're constantly being abducted and experimented with. We're just it's like me. My medical now is all run by people who, again, want to see how I'm going to do with this, because they gave me so many drugs. I mean, not fun ones either. Just things that in my blood, things to do this to my heart, this to do, and so. But right now, I'm talking to you guys, and my mind is distracted from the pain, and is focused on telling you a story. And right now, I'm really not feeling no pain. Right now, if I just would do this, oh yeah, it hurts. Like all the muscles in my groin, and from my hips to my knees to my tips of my toes. It's like ouch. One thing that doesn't hurt anymore is my chest. Right. So, and the doctors all said, hey, it worked out great. And then the next day they gave me all the tests and did sonograms and did all that stuff. And I said, seems like it's all working. And supposed to go back to my new heart doctor that's on the other side of me. Um, and he's going to check out the work. And I should bring up any questions, or he's going to be my more personal guy. I said, and you could ask him about anything else. Even though he's a heart doctor, he can be your one. We're going to get you two more, general practitioners. So I said, okay. So, so a culture. That's all we are. We're just somebody's lab experiment in a petri dish. And if we think we're anything more than that, then forget about it. And what we are, we should stop being slaves to the political structure. We need to stop being the slaves to the religious culture, right? We should stop fucking around. fornicating under church and king, right? And all fornication is when. So back in the day when I worked for the desperate corporate lawyers, and these clowns, they had 11 figure salary a year, and they were still living paycheck to paycheck because they were so overextended. It was ridiculous. And so they every night they would go out to the titty bars and these super fancy restaurants and all the rest. And I was with them, so I went with it. They paid the bill. I didn't, so I had that super hedonist um, exposure to the life of the rich and the famous, right? And it's not a great, very, I love those meals, but it's not a big deal. Let's see. Hey, it's Brandon. How are you, buddy? Tried to call you a few times. You don't seem to pick up, but I hope you're doing well. Um, I'm doing better and better. And so, anyway, that over accelerated life of the rich and famous that I experienced for about 10 years and gained 240 pounds on. And I was already 220 pounds. So, when I died in 2014, I weighed about, you know, uh, 460 pounds. And that first night in the hospital, I mean, they had all these. I was hooked up to so many machines that were beeping and whirling. And I guess they think if you're hooked up to these machines, you're next to death, so you're not hearing it. But I was actually, I was losing, the thing of being kind of stoned from whatever they gave me for the operation. But and they did give me an interesting little pill. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, it's like a super aspirin." I said, "It's not like OxyContin. No, it's not a barbiturate. It's not a you know that kind of drug. No, no." But he was, I took it, and boy, it got rid of the physical pain. But all that did was, allowed me to hear and all the whines and the whistles and the beeps of all those machines. And around 3 in the morning, they came in and got me out of bed to see how much I weighed. I said, "Wait a minute, you weighed me like 6 hours ago." Well, it's so they had all these protocols because I had all these wires on me. And I just kept, in my sleep, I just kept ripping them off. And the second time, I had about at least 12 little pads on me that they glued to my right, going, seeing what my heart was doing and all that kind of stuff. And so the first time I ripped them off, it hurt, and they came in, and because the machine, it was whistling saying I was dead. They came in and they found me, and I said, Ugh. So they put more pads on me with super glue this time because I tied it. I couldn't take it off, and so I basically just unhooked the wire. I'm an electrician. I can do that. Just unhook the wire. Anyway, I did that 2 or 3 times, and I was basically asleep, and I was like all over the place in this stupid bed in the hallway, and they kept saying, why?" Like I was like hanging sideways off the bed, and they'd wake me up and. What do you get back in the what's going on? I said, it's just you morons. I can't, can't go to sleep with these machines. And you got me in the hallway. That's why they brought me up to the Holiday Inn. And it was quite a nice room. It's so hard to sleep in a hospital, right? So anyway, in the Holiday Inn, it was quite. I had a really kind of nice bed, right, and still had all the wires and the whistles and the buzzing and stuff. And that's when they, when it came to weigh me, I said, I can't sleep here. So they went away and one of the major domos of that place earlier on, before they had finished the operation and I was like on cloud nine. And he came and said, let me, I hear you read Bond. Say, and I like gave it to him with both barrels. And he was like, whoa. So anyway, I think he told them, whatever this guy needs. And so when I said, I can't sleep in the hallway, so they said, okay. They called up the Holiday Inn part of the hospital and said, "Hey, do you have one of those suites?" And they said, "Yep." So they put, and it was a nice bed, and I could sleep in. And they did all the way. And I said, "Okay, it's now 4 a.m. Do not, I will. I promise not to disconnect myself from the machines. If you promise not to come in here and wake me up like in 40 minutes, like don't come and wake me up until like 8 a. until you're gonna bring me breakfast." And so I said, "Oh, that reminds us, you're in the Holiday Inn now. What do you want for breakfast?" And so they gave me a really nice, fruit, lots of fruit, really nice fruit. And of course, it was all GMO, but it was nice and tasty, and oatmeal and an omelet. It was quite nice. And some nice pastries and really relatively good coffee. And so they said, "So what do you want for breakfast?" And they read the menu. And so about 8 a.m., more like 9 a.m., they woke me up with breakfast. And it was nice. I kind of had it. And then, time went by, and then this doctor visited me and checked me out. And they had, the lady. And the other nice thing, since I wasn't in the hallway, I was in the Holiday Inn. They did they rolled all the different machines, the X-ray machines, the what you call it, the sonograms, all that stuff. They rolled in and did it to me in a nice Holiday Inn bed, and the people were very nice. And I read everyone's palm, and they were like, "Oh yeah." So by around 11 o'clock in the morning, you know, it was it was like a conga line into my room, because this one, he was a manager of security, and the interface of the patient and the administration of the hospital. So he was on the board. He came in and said, "I want to know how you feeling about our treating." "Oh, great, great A, number one. You guys are great." And I told him the story that back in the day when I was a psychosocial cultural forensic anthropologist as a consultant, I did many things, and one of the things I did was as a demographer that I would basically go look at like hospitals, schools, prisons, things that had protocols, and to see, investigate, see how well those protocols worked with the people that they were trying to take care of. And you know, anyway, so I visited lots of hospitals, and earlier on, back in the day, in the late '60s and '70s, when I was working at the VA. At the VA, they started having new kind of machines, and they needed special kind of um, electrics, not just your basic outlet that you plug your blender into, but it had to have specific voltage that was very isolated, um, and a ground that was specifically isolated. And some of the machines they actually worked on high voltage because they were from Europe. And so they needed a power supply right there, like a transformer. And so I started doing that work in the VA hospital along with my other um, things. And that's how I got into being a hospital electrician, because I met guys from Siemens and GE and Westinghouse and other hospital, Johnson and Johnson, and a few other people, and they saw me what I was doing, and they said, "Wow, we'd love to. Can you want to come to work for us?" I said, "Not really, but I'll be your consultant. I'll work for you job by job. I'm not going to be an employee." And they went away and thought about it, and they said, that actually worked better for us, you know. And I said, "Good, and I will give you a contract that will say exactly." So instead of getting like $6 an hour back in the '70s, that was a pretty good hourly rate. I mean, when I was a union electrician, though, when I worked on the World Trade Center, I was making $30 an hour. Right, that was 1973 or four. And anyway, so I would charge these guys, a nice, to install the electrics for one of these specialized machines with specialized electric, I'd say, oh, that'll cost 5 grand, and that was no problem, you know. And they loved it because I gave them a contract that stated everything I would do. All their engineers and everybody would look at the contract, add things, take things away, blah blah blah, and they loved it because they didn't have to worry about it. Their legal department thought it was a great idea because they weren't responsible. If something screwed up, it was on my nickel. I did have to get better insurance though. So anyway, there I was back working at the VA, and I was just a bedpan guy. And as these guys would come in totally strung out because they would just stick them on, they get blown up in Vietnam out in the paddy. The helicopter would fly them back like within the hour of getting blown up, and the mash was really right on top of it. And so they would, stop them from dying and basically, put patch the hole in their heart, but not for good, but just so they could stay alive. And the body really wants to stay alive unless it doesn't. It's an interesting thing about that. Anyway, so here we are, 41 minutes and 23 seconds. Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with your Sensei Bob. I am here at a friend's house. My cell doesn't work here, so I can't call any of you. But if you give me, get a hold of me at the dude awake 42 at Gmail, I'll email you. I can do that. Actually, I can't because the phone, the device that well, you can still do it, and I will see it, and I will know you, and then I'll get a hold of you when it's easy to, or I'll try and use my laptop. I think that would work. But if you want to stick anything in my um, PayPal, you just go to PayPal and the dude awake 42 at Gmail, all lowercase, all together. The dude awake 42 at Gmail. Right? So get a hold of me there, and or send me some cash to PayPal using that address. And how about some thumbs up? Right? How about some subscriptions? Let's see what we can do at getting me further up on the YouTube algorithm. I mean, I know they kind of keep me down on the farm. I mean, I have over almost 600 subscribers, but I never. I mean, I once did a telethon, a YouTube telethon, just like what's his name, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Just like Jerry Lewis used to do the telethon, I did that. And I did it out at John's house where I had really good Wi-Fi, and I did it for almost 20 something hours. And anyway, and that's on this thing. You can go look at. I have over 2,500 shows up on the old YouTube, and I started doing this around 2018. Right, so 18 to 19, 20, and then the 5 years. So I've been doing this almost 7 years. And I am that little pebble in the pond of the World Wide Web. That's why I don't care about, having a zillion views because each of these shows I do, the way I tell these stories, they are shamanic ceremonies, right? I'm dropping the shamanic pebble into the pond, and it affects everything on the internet, right? So, there I was at the VA, dealing with all these guys because they would stick these guys. The flight from Vietnam to Germany was like 9 hours. The flight from Vietnam to the Philippines was about 9 hours. And the flight from each of those to wherever people were going in America were like somewhere between 9 and 6 hours. So they didn't want guys being on, if you had 120 guys in gurneys in an airplane. You didn't want them screaming. You wanted them to be knocked out. So they all were on an IV. And that was the other thing that I was on. I was on an IV. They dumped about 3 liters of. I said, "What's in that?" It's just saline. I said, "Really? There's nothing else in there?" Anyway, so and that machine would stop, and then they'd have to come in and make sure I wasn't dead, and because I wasn't going to rip out my IV, and I knew if I disconnected the arm would, the electrical part of it, the alarm would just go off. So I didn't touch the IV. But everything else, But once they, sent me up to the Holiday Inn, it was much better. Well, anyway, there I am in the VA, and I'm interacting with these guys. I'm just a bedpan guy, but I'm the guy who sees them mostly because the nurses and doctors are so busy, they just come and check on them. Me, I'm in the ward, kind of saying, "You want some water? You need some ice cubes in your mouth? What do you want?" Here, and I had no problem grabbing their dick and putting it in the jug to take, and I had no problem sticking them on the bedpan and having them, crap into it and wipe their butt. You know, Bodies to me are not a big deal. I'm not that. My father was such a prude; he couldn't. If he saw his skin, he'd get all upset. So anyway, I remember one time when I was taking care of my parents, like in '05 or '06, near then, before the crash. Um, we would go to. They lived in a gated community, very very fancy. It had big fancy um, club house where they had a great restaurant, and whether you ate it or not, the house um, was charged $300 per person that lived there. So my mom and dad were both there, so that's $600. And you could have ex guest, and I was the ex guest. So they had about $900 worth of services from the gated community, right? And whether you ate it or not, you got charged it. So I would, just I love food, and so great thing. And the chef who was there, I'd known him since he got the job, and I helped him a couple of times with his kids, and he would come out, and all the other guys who are governors and senators and people who worked on the you know this big important banking, right? He wouldn't go. He would come and he would say, greetings to my parents, and said, "Al, how you doing? How was dinner? Do you want anything else? Do you want something special? Well, let me make you a special this or a special that. We got some great fish in. You want that?" So, and I would go there for lunch too, right? And the afternoon sous chef was, again, pretty much everyone, because you weren't supposed to tip any of those people. And every time I would meet someone, whether they came and mowed the lawn or, fixed something or did anything, I would hand them a $10 bill. Right? And this is like from the '70s on. My parents moved there in the end of the '70s. Anyway, and so I was treated better. I got the best service than anybody, all the other rich people who thought they, deserved, they were entitled. And I never acted entitled, but I gave everyone a $10 bill. Everyone. When we were at the restaurant, I would, when we finished the meal, I'd put the $10 bill under the plate, and because they had these kind of interesting little trays that, it wasn't just on a plate, it was on a tray. So I would slip the $10 bill underneath the plate. And so they'd take it away, and there it is, right? And the guy who would take our car, I usually drove the car, and I get out, and he would park the car, and I would, along with the keys, I would, um, you know, I'd give him a $10 bill. So um, that's how you ensure, the word tips, to ensure proper service, right? So got to the bank. always treated everyone like I'm not entitled, you are, right? And so I get the best service, the best, you know, the life has always been there for me. I've been in really bad scenes. I've been shot twice when I was a New York City Housing Authority policeman, and I wasn't. I went through their training. I was a policeman, but I was one of four conflict resolution officers that were in the whole New York City, because New York City at the time they had a police force that was out on the street, the flatfoot, the cop on the beat, and then they had the subway police and they had the housing police, and that's what I was. But when there was something went astray, like a bank robbery, and the cops would come and get me, and I would go intercede on that kind of thing. I was out of the four guys. I was the one of those guys because the other people who did that, they all had all these degrees and all this, and they went by really stupid protocols, and they always wanted to be in charge. They get on scene, and whoever the scene commander was, they would have usually have a tussle with the scene commander about their authority. And me, not at all. I would show up and I would say, Chief. They weren't chiefs, but I would call them chiefs because chiefs were higher up on the totem pole. Chief, so give me the lowdown, and what do you want me to do? Right? Let's make a strategy together. And who is your second and third in command, and who is your line commander? And so they would get those four or five people together, and we would have a nice little meeting that would take, I don't know, 10 minutes, because all I wouldn't say anything. I said, what do you guys need? You tell me. And I would listen to what they said. And each time they would give me their report, I would say, I hear you saying. I would repeat what they said back to them, just so I know that they knew I was listening to them and we could all be on the same page. And that's one of my best negotiating things, because when I'm negotiating in the scene, that's what I just live. I don't say anything. I don't. Oh, I'm important. Oh, I have all this stuff. Blah blah blah. Right. I don't say any of that. I just say, okay, tell me the story. Uh huh. Uh huh. Uh huh. So I hear you say it, right, and then I repeat it back to them, and like I said, then once they know that you're actually listening to them and appreciate what they're saying, that's when they're ready to work with you. And so when I would deal with any kind of situation, I would say, "So what do you guys want? What do you need? Tell me." And then they would tell you either over the phone or in person. And because I liked just walking in, right? Because I never wore a uniform, never wore a suit. I would just, if it was warm, I'd have shorts and a Hawaiian shirt and, comfy shows and sunglasses, because I wear, so I was in a hospital, Tuesday, Wednesday, um, and basically, I was wearing my real dark shades because that fluorescent light they have really kills me. I can't do it. Anyway, so people would come in and go, "Why are you wearing your sunglasses?" I said, "Well, the light." And so it got to a point where I, like, it was, they gave all, they, when I took all my clothes off, I put my shoes, everything went into a plastic bag, and they gave it to my friend, right? Expecting that when he would come and see me, he would give it to me. But no, he put it in his car and drove away with it. Anyway, the one thing that they got, because when I was, in there getting ready, prepared, I was wearing sunglasses. And because even though my little alcove, I said, "Can you turn that fluorescent light off when you don't need it?" They said, "Sure, sure, sure." And so, and they had, the operating room kind of light. So they, wherever they needed real light on, they would shine that thing. And so, but I was wearing my sunglasses. And so the nurse who was going to be in charge in the operating room, I said, here, I want you to hold on these sunglasses. So the only thing I had from my stuff were my sunglasses. So every time I went to it, went from the operating room where I was unconscious, and but I wasn't wearing those. But what the lady did was, she goes, "You know what I'm going to do?" I said, "What?" I said, "I'm going to go get. We have nice little, things that you put over your eyes so light doesn't come in." And so, because some people are super sensitive to light, yeah, like me. And she goes, "Yeah, like you." So we have protocol where we put this on you in the operating room. So she gave me those, right? And she had my sunglasses. So every place I was, when I was moved from the, ICU, and then into the recovery space. I was wearing my sunglasses, and people would, doctors and different people would come by and say, "Why are you wearing sunglasses?" I said, "Well, the light really bothers my eyes." And this one doctor, again, totally entitled, thought he was God. So, no, that's. And I said, and I was like hitting a little button right for the nurse, because they gave me this nurse, and I read her palm, and she was the angel. Um, so anyway, he's like, he takes the glasses off, right? And he shines a light in my eyes. And listen, I have super blue eyes. Yeah, super blue eyes. And my eyes, are always dilated, right? So I'm always, very sensitive to light. So he shines my eyes, the flashlight in my eyes, so my eyes will dilate. And the nurse, I'm hitting a button. The nurse comes and she whacks him upside the head with her clipboard. "What are you doing, this guy? Didn't he tell you that he's really sensitive to light?" And I said, she said, "Look at that." She clipboard was on my bed, and she says, "Look, it says right here, super sensitive to light." You know, and so he skulked away. Right, and later he came back and wanted his palm read. Right, so I read his palm. So that was the other thing that kept being woke up to do is, I must have, like I said, done 50 readings. Anyway, so that was a great experience. And So when I worked at the VA, right, and everyone had these things, I never did. I had my Hawaiian shirt and shorts and flip flops. And so how I got into the deeper side of that job, uh, my boss, the boss of everyone, the colonel who ran the whole, it was Fort Hamilton, who wrote a whole thing. He said, he came in and he said, "Al, I want to talk to you." And this guy runs everything. Yeah, I never talked to this guy. I knew who he was, but he's the boss. He's colonel of, bird colonel of the whole hospital. And this was a big hospital. Fort Hamilton probably had 500 beds at least. So I, you know, said, "Did I do anything wrong?" He goes, "No, no. In actuality, you've done everything right." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I want you to be my protege." And I said, "Colonel, I don't know how to say this, but I'm just a freak." And he said, "That's what I'm looking for." And that's what he sent me to study every kind of medicine, every kind of alternative medicine, any kind of cutting edge medicine. So for the next year and a half, I wasn't at Fort Hamilton that much. I was in all these other places doing all kinds of really interesting. That's how I went into Davenport, Iowa, or Idaho, or wherever it is, where they have the last college of osteopathic medicine. So I didn't do the like 8 years there. He had 3 or 4 really good friends he was in the military with, and for about 6 weeks with each guy, I just put the white coat on and stayed by their side and took notes on this, that, and the other thing, and then we talk about it. And each of those weeks, I would go home with those guys and stay at their house. And they were all married, had kids or didn't have kids, and it was quite the experience. And so I kind of, medicine is something you study, meaning you study. You just don't go to school and learn something and that's it. You study. When you're a doctor, you're supposed to be learning all the freaking time. So you study, you practice, and they call it practice. Not like I know everything. I'm practicing. You practice and then you teach. Right? And so that's what those guys were doing with me. So had that experience. I, you know, Dr. Fung in Chinatown in New York. I studied Chinese medicine with him and herbalism and Chief Two Trees. Go look him up on the internet. Um, and he came in and out of New York a lot. And he would come and get me, and we would go to different parts of the Northeast and study. Go to different forests, different other different healers. Um, and then I went to Putney, Vermont, where this a Shinto priest from Japan was going to start a school, and I was basically his number one first student. I showed up. This lady donated her farm to the endeavor because she was an herbalist, and she had died, and the farm had gone into feral, and no one even, the lawyer didn't even look at her will, and her will said, "I want it to be turned into a school, and I want this guy to." And my colonel was the guy that was supposed to administrate it, right? So anyway, he kind of checked up on it after, it kind of, he didn't even know the lady died. And he kind of checked up on her and she was dead for 6 years. Then he talked to, the lawyer and he said, "Hey, what about this lady's farm? She told me she was going to donate it. And she wanted to school there." And the lawyer didn't even know that. He didn't even read her will. All he knew that there was nobody. She was, had no children, no husband, no cousins, no nephews, no one in her life to, you know, have that property. So he forgot about it, right? So he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, I see what it's supposed to be." So that's when the ball started rolling, and that's when my colonel sent me to him, and that was quite interesting. I've told that story many times. So, and that's my life. My life is just one story after another because I don't have a false god. Money isn't my false god. Hedonism isn't my false god. So when I was, living, I got paid about 70 grand a year, and I only worked 11 weeks of the year. I had a consulting business with lawyers. I negotiated things for them. I deposed people, or I didn't depose people. I watched the lawyer or his, legal aid or whoever depose them, and I would observe the deposition. And there's usually the deposition starts off, and if whatever time it is, there's a time where they get a break and they can, they're brought food and then they go back to it. So because being deposed doesn't mean you're guilty or doesn't mean you did anything wrong. You're either a witness or you were the person involved within the disagreement, and so you need to be disposed. That's what I suppose. Disposed. We got to dispose this person, and I would just be there, and I would, you know, take my assessments of the situation, and then when we would take a break, over coffee in Danish, I would have this list of stuff and questions to ask, and it was quite interesting to see. That was an interesting job doing that. So I did that for 11 weeks and would make about 70 grand a year. Right? And that would keep me in a certain tax bracket. So I didn't have to. And I would take most of that money and buy investments, right? And, metals and properties and stocks and businesses that weren't public yet. I'd meet, in doing this lawyering thing, I meet people, and I would, somebody would say, you're an interesting guy. You know all this stuff about a lot of different things, and yet you don't call yourself an expert. So I need you to do the same thing you did here uh, for me because I'm starting this business because I'm going to get people to work. I instead of like having HR, I want you to interview these people. So I did a good deal of that, and instead of taking a chunk of change for that, if I thought the business was going to be a valuable thing, I said, how about me taking a chunk of what you think I'm worth, and then I'm be on your board, and I'll be a asset to you as long as I'm on your board. And then when it goes public, I'll get my cut. Right. So I did that too a number of times. And so by the time the 90s rolled around, which was, you know, I started being a consultant in 88, right? But I worked for people like Brookings and other entities like that, and doing kind of more, psychosocial, cultural, forensic, anthropologic kind of insights. And I got paid very well, and again, I was a consultant, so it was me. But I didn't do that very much. And they would put me in situations, mostly in universities, where I would be part of a group that were doing research on something. And I was the person who didn't really have know, my career wasn't really depending on whatever project I was involved with, right? Because I was not representing the project per se, but more the people who were investing in it. And so, and I would be at a certain point, one of my skill sets, I was very good at making protocols. Once they were doing their base, everyone had a speciality. They were expert in this, that, or the other thing, and they were doing a project on this, that, or the other thing. And I was the person that most of these people would come and talk to get a perspective on the project without having to worry about that it was going to get back and they might get in trouble or blah blah. And that was part of my specialty. That was part of my shtick. And that the people who sent me there said, "Listen, this guy is going to be like pretty much in everything, but he's not going to control anything, right? And what he's really here to do is to give everyone a sounding board on what they're doing in the project and that they can feel safe. He's here to make everyone feel safe about the present because research can get pretty cutthroat. And I was there to ameliorate that. It's not only the animal, but the spirit, right? Is when everyone works together. Now, a lot of animals can be in pods and groups and you know things of that nature, and they can be supportive of each other. But they don't, build rocket ships, and they don't, that kind of stuff. Yeah, they have tools. Yeah, they can do interesting stuff, but humans really are the only ones who do these kind of very strange, amazing things. Anyway, so that was, from 88 till 2003. And that's when I kind of eased my way, from 88 to 2003 is when I was, figuring out my process. And so anyway, I was making from 88 till, 2014, I was making really good money, not working that hard. Now, when I was younger and was just the electrician, artist, culture guy, yeah, I always had whatever money I needed. I never had to worry about money because it was like magic. Because New York was my town. I had so many different clients there. I could go away for years and come back and then just make a few calls, and within a day or two, I'd have a nice job. Wiring a restaurant, wiring a club, wiring an apartment house, whatever. And right away, I could be making 4 or 5 grand a week. And in the 70s and 80s, that's pretty good, right? And most of those jobs weren't like on book, right? So, A, they got a great job. B, I had so many relationships with like inspectors and other companies and all kinds of stuff that I was really an asset within there. I've always been an asset in everything I ever did, right? And so I always got really. I mean, when I remember when I was 16, I had my own apartment on Avenue B and Ninth Street. It was a old Catholic nunnery that had been bought by a real estate Sylvan Lawrence Real Estate, who I worked for. I was and Grandpa Stoll was their electrician as he got older, and Mike got more busy with like building buildings like the United Nations and the Seagram's building, and big projects and not little things. And so I would always get the little things, which were big enough for me, and it would be run through Stoll Electric, and so they took care of all of that. I just did the job and got, you know, I'd be on the books because both Grandpa and Mike wanted me to get my license, and to get it, you had to have 16 years of consecutive W-2 forms. So yeah, I paid a nice little thing to Uncle Sam. That's why I have what you call it, Social Security. I actually paid into that, but not all the time, right? Not like 40 years of it. Maybe 8, 15, 16, 18 years of it. Anyway, but through that, I worked for all these other clients of Stoll Electric that I would go do these little, I mean, they were big jobs, restaurants, whole, you know, apartment buildings with like 10 fancy loft apartments. So anyway, this place was beautiful nunnery, and it had, it was a brick 1800s brick building, really beautiful. Had a cast iron facade in the front, back from those days, and architecturally, it was an amazing building. And it had stained glass all over the place. Inside was amazing, and I got to live in the supers, apartment down. And in New York, they have these apartments that aren't quite in the basement; they're like in the middle. And um, and my door, what came, you see movies in New York City, and they have these steps that go up to the second floor, and that's really the first floor. And why is that? Because before cars, all the streets of New York were covered in horseshit, and so to not, you know, bring the horseshit into the house, you had like 5, 10, 20 steps up to the front door where you could there are edges of these steps that you could scrape the horse shit off your shoe, and then the super would clean it, not the whole steps but these corners of the steps that you could scrape your soiled shoes. Anyway, I lived in this nunnery, and my door was underneath the steps that went up to the first floor. And my little apartment, it was called a railroad flat, meaning it was like a railroad car, just about 12 feet wide and about 30 feet long, right? No walls, no nothing. The toilet was on the wall. There was a bathtub in the kitchen. I had a little stove and a hot plate and a little refrigerator and a nice bed and a table and a desk. But at the end of um, my railroad flat was these two French doors that went onto a really beautiful patio that went down to a gigantic garden that these nuns put all of their heart and soul into, right? And so it was really beautiful. It had vegetable garden and flower garden and trees. It had a nice little, spring, not spring, but like a fountain. So it was always the sound of trickling water. And that little mist would come if I left the doors open. It would almost like air condition that apartment. So it was a nice little apartment, except it was like, you know 12 feet wide, and in the middle were these a circular staircase that went up to my ceiling, and the top was boarded up. So anyway, I'm living in it, and on the side where Ninth Street went down to the Hudson was kind of a little hill, right? So the buildings cut into the hill, and my windows were like right at sidewalk height, and I'd be sitting at my one table, two chairs, and I'd be eating breakfast before I took off, and everyone's getting off to work, and there'd be all these girls walking off to their office jobs, and they'd be in their mini skirts, and I'd have this view of like woo woo, and so that was kind of interesting. And one morning, I'm getting ready to go to work, and I hear a knock on my door. I go to it, and this guy, he looks like a mountain man. He's got this head of black hair, curly hair, black beard, and black glasses. He goes, "Hi, I'm Alan. I'm your neighbor upstairs, and I can tell you like to cook. That staircase, and it's boarded up. I mean, you know, those smells come right up there. It's not like concrete or anything. It's just boarded up." And he goes, "What I really love to do is garden. And I can look up my window and I see that big garden and I can't get there because I have to go through your apartment to get to that. There's no other way. So what I'm thinking, come upstairs." And so I come upstairs, and the first floor was where the nuns had their dining room and their kitchen and their sanctuary, like their church. They had a library, and then this, kind of like living room with these really nice couches built in. And they had two, rooms that they were nice. They had a view. One had the view out into Tompkins Park, and the other had on Ninth and B, and the other one the other way had a beautiful view of the garden. And so they were both what you would think of as nice bedrooms. They could be because they had a door, and they had between them an amazing bathroom, gigantic bathroom with bathtubs and showers, and this like fire hose that you could turn on and get the right temperature, and you'd ease yourself into the fire hose stream, and it's like getting a massage. It's just amazing. And so the nuns had it pretty good there, and I'm sure they, were using the hose for other things. And so um, he takes me up there and shows me, and the kitchen was like a commercial kitchen, stainless steel. It had, a Garland stove. It had all Hobart everything. It had a walk-in fridge. It was just great. And he says, "I don't cook, but you do. So, you know, let's be roommates." So I said, "Fine." So, we pulled up the boards from the staircase, and bingo. So he gave me the room that was like my room. I had one of those bedrooms, and I had the little, sanctuary that had the stained glass windows. Because he didn't, he's a nice Jewish boy. But even that, he didn't like. I don't know why he didn't like that room, but he didn't. That was one room he really didn't like to go into. And he was half the time never there. He was all over the place. But every Friday we would have a great um, uh, potluck dinner, right? And all the intelligentsia. And I'm 16 years old, right? And so I meet all these people. I meet, Herbert Berghoff and Lisette Modell, who had HB Studios. They were European filmmakers, and they had a acting film school on 10th and Bank Street on the West Side. And they, the Living Theater, Lisette Modell and not Lisette Modell, but Lisette Modell and Cartier-Bresson, who started Vogue and were photographers. And when those guys saw the pictures I took, Lisette said, "Oh, you have to be part of our salon." And every Sunday we would go to her house, and she had this great apartment right on Fifth Avenue, right on the corner of where Washington Square is, where NYU is. And she taught at the New School and at Pace, and that was really great. And so I got to know all these great photographers. I ended up being part of Magnum, and I got to know. I'd already known. Billy Kluver. When I was 10, and my parents lived across the street from, uh, you know, the what you call that thing that runs the world. Um, it's right on the corner of Park Avenue and 69th Street. It's right near Hunter. What's it called? It'll come pop into my head. But Billy was their. He was like their version of me, but he came from a more pedigreed education. I mean, I had a pedigreed education, but I didn't matriculate. I just kept going on to all these great schools and studying under the best of the best of the teachers, and would get everything I could. I'd squeak, and I wouldn't. College is mostly there for young people to jerk off and meet other people. That's really what college is about. But I viewed all the different universities I was in as, you know, a opportunity to learn, um, absorb this information. And I had this, I don't know if you ever seen the movie Braveheart, but there the Scottish are fighting the English, and this Irish guy shows up and wants to sign up. He wants to kill the English, so he's where there's a war fighting the English, that's where he's going to be. Anyway, so he shows up, and they said, "So why should you're Irish? You guys are just kind of slugs." And he said, "No, no, no. I hate the English worse than you hate them, and I am a druid, and I talk to God. God talks to me." And so he constantly would tell Mel Gibson, God said this about you, blah, blah, blah. And I basically had the same kind of relationship that guy had. So, no, I don't hear voices, but I will think about certain things that would be social, psychosocial, cultural, forensic, and anthropologic in manner. And I would think of it as, I would, I would think of different things. And when I would like hit on what God wanted me to do, I would like get this scent of lilac, right? Or I would hear the hum of a singing bowl, right? And not really big time, just the most subtlest of subtle. And that's God. God is the subtlest of subtle beauty, right? And earlier on, like when I was 7 and ended up, being murdered by a Nazi Catholic nun, and ended up in a hospital, and then ended up in a sanctuary of the Maryknolls in Garden City, Long Island, and they put me back together. She broke my esophagus. She broke the organ in my eye, so I couldn't speak. I could barely breathe. So I was really weak. I couldn't see out of. I could see out of my left eye, but I couldn't. It didn't make sense. And my ear, same thing. That she broke the little stirrup in my ear, and it wasn't like I couldn't hear in it, but it didn't make sense. And what's interesting, so people have tennisons. So from that point on, from 7 years old on till now, um, I've had tennisons. Now I've known loads of people who have it, and oh, I can't. They don't. They basically close down. They don't really um, interact with humanity anymore, right? I had a girlfriend. She had that, and she's a great person. And when that happened to her, you know, and so she once said to me, I can't do what you do. You've had tennis in your whole life, and you've gotten used to it. I said, I didn't get used to it. I just reoriented myself to it. And all of those things that people would call handicaps, like I have every learning handicap there's in the book. There's, like autism was discovered by a priest back in I think the 17th century. Right? He was a doctor, and he was a doctor for some king, and his son had that, and that's where the name came from. So anyway, I had you name it, I had it. But all of these people who were in this sanctuary, and there were nuns and men, priests, but they were neither priests or nuns. They were doulas. This is where I got this from. They were doulas to God. And they said that in Greek, that's where I learned Greek. Um, the word doula in Greek means slave to God's love, right? And that's where you have agape love, right? Uncontrollable, undefinable love, right? So that's what I got. So, oh, there's four people at once. How about some thumbs up, kids? So at 16, I knew all these, and I was working at the Fillmore East, so I got to know Jimi Hendrix. I actually was the not electrician of Electric Ladyland, but I had redid a number of student A&R and RCA and Virgin and Blue Rock and Sun Dragon. So those were all built by other people, and they were all wired by like local free guys. But recording studios are a lot like hospitals, meaning, yeah, they all of the stuff that you're using to record the stuff, the recorders, Studer boards, the Neve decks, um, and